It was just after sunset when Noah noticed her for the first time. He was standing at his kitchen counter, lazily sipping coffee, when something outside caught his eye. The apartment building across the street had only one lit window. Inside it, framed by pale curtains, stood an old woman. Her face was pressed close to the glass, so close her forehead almost touched it. Her skin was paper-thin, stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones, and her eyes were fixed directly on him. At first, Noah thought it was just one of those accidental moments. Maybe she was just looking out at the street, maybe her gaze just happened to meet his. He tried to ignore it, turning back to his drink. But curiosity kept pulling his head back toward the window. She hadn't moved. Not a blink. Not a shift. Not even the faint rise and fall of breathing. Noah frowned. She was dressed in a faded, old-fashioned nightgown, the kind his grandmother used to wear. Her hair was thin, wispy, and white, hanging over her shoulders like damp cobwebs. The light from her room gave her skin a pale, almost waxy glow, like a mannequin that had been left in a dusty corner for too long. Something about her posture was wrong. She wasn't leaning casually on the windowsill, she was gripping it. Her long, bony fingers curled tightly around the wooden frame, knuckles showing white. A strange heaviness filled Noah's chest. It was as if the longer he looked, the more the air thickened around him. Finally he gave a small, awkward wave. She didn't respond. Didn't blink. Didn't even twitch. The feeling of being seen settled deep into Noah's stomach. He stepped back from his own window, telling himself it was nothing. People watch the street all the time, right? But even from across the room, he could feel it, the weight of her stare following him. He pulled the curtain closed. And in the moment before the fabric shut out the view, he thought, just for a second. Her lips had started to curl into a faint, unnatural smile. The next night, Noah told himself he wouldn't look. He even avoided the kitchen after dark, not wanting to risk catching sight of her again. But as the clock crept toward 11 p.m., his curiosity began to itch in the back of his mind. What if she wasn't there? What if she was? Eventually he gave in. Coffee mug in hand, he stood by the window and pulled the curtain aside. She was there. Same spot. Same faded nightgown. Same pale skin that seemed to glow under the dim yellow light of her room. But tonight, she was even closer to the glass, her nose almost touching it. Her dead, unblinking eyes were locked on his. Noah froze mid-sip. It was exactly the same as last night. Same posture, same grip on the windowsill, even the same faint tilt of her head. It was unnatural, as if she had been standing there the entire day, never eating, never sleeping. The longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. The street between them was completely silent. No cars, no people, just the dim hum of the street lamp above. In that silence, Noah thought he could hear something faint, like the creak of old wood under shifting weight. But she didn't move. He tried to break the tension by lifting his hand in another awkward wave. Nothing. The seconds stretched. His stomach knotted. Then he noticed something new, her mouth. Not a smile, not a frown, just slightly open, like she was about to speak. Her lips were dry, cracked, and pale. But no sound came. Noah forced himself to turn away. He walked into the living room, switched on the TV, tried to drown out the image in his mind. But no matter how much noise filled the room, he could still feel her eyes on him, cutting through the walls. Finally, he decided to close the curtains for the night. As he reached for them, he hesitated. The old woman was still there. Only now her hand had moved. One finger rested against the glass, as if tracing something invisible. And in the fog her breath left behind, there was a faint heart shape. Noah barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her pale face pressed against the glass. The image of that faint heart shape in the fog wouldn't leave his mind. By midnight, he had given up on sleep entirely. He sat in his living room with the TV on low, just for the noise. That's when it happened. Knock. A slow, deliberate sound, echoing from his front door. He froze. His apartment was on the 7th floor. Visitors at this hour weren't common. Knock. The second one was louder, heavier. Noah's chest tightened. He glanced toward his window. half expecting to see the old woman still there, but her lit window across the street was empty now. The curtains on her side were swaying slightly, as if they had just been disturbed. The air in the apartment seemed thicker. His ears picked up every sound, the faint hum of the fridge, the dull ticking of the wall clock, and the quiet shuffle of footsteps outside his door. Knock. This one was softer, almost playful. No. Noah whispered under his breath. His legs carried him forward anyway, slow and unwilling. He pressed his ear to the door. No breathing. No voices. Just silence. He took a deep breath and turned the handle. The hallway outside was empty. Almost empty. Down the hall, a single muddy footprint marked the otherwise clean floor. Just one, facing his apartment. The tread pattern was strange, not like a normal shoe. It was narrower, longer, almost claw-like at the tip. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. He stepped back inside and locked the door. That's when his phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. The text was only 4 words. You left your window open. Noah's blood ran cold. He spun toward the living room. The curtain he had drawn earlier was now slightly open, a thin strip of darkness peeking through. And through that gap, a pale face was watching him. Noah didn't move for a full minute. The pale face at the gap in his curtain didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't even seem alive. It was just there, watching him. His breath came in shallow bursts as he backed into the kitchen. His phone was still on the counter. With shaking hands, he dialed 911. The operator's calm voice barely registered. There's a woman watching me from the building across the street, he stammered. She's been there 2 nights in a row. She's not moving. I think something's wrong. The operator asked for details, then promised to send an officer. Noah didn't dare go back to the window, but he couldn't resist glancing at it from the corner of his eye. She was still there. Her face hadn't moved an inch, but her lips were slightly parted now, just enough for him to see the darkness inside her mouth. 10 minutes later, blue and red lights flashed outside. An officer stepped out of the patrol car, glanced up at the building across the street, then disappeared inside. Noah's heartbeat slowed just a little. Finally, someone else would see her. Finally, this nightmare could be explained. But when the officer returned, his face was puzzled. There's no one in that apartment, he said. It's been vacant for years. No furniture, no electricity. The place is locked tight. Noah's stomach dropped. No, she's there right now. Look. The officer followed Noah's pointing finger. The window across the street was empty. Completely empty. You probably just imagined it, the officer said, scribbling something on his notepad. Maybe a reflection. If anything happens again, give us a call. Noah wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. His mouth was dry, his throat tight. The officer left, and silence filled the apartment again. Noah turned slowly toward the window. His curtain was fully closed now. But when he reached out to touch it, his fingers brushed something cold and wet on the fabric. He pulled his hand back. It was a perfect, wet handprint. Noah barely moved for the rest of the evening. The wet handprint on his curtain felt like a warning, like she had been inside his apartment, and decided to leave a reminder. He checked every lock twice. The windows. The door. Even the tiny bathroom window he never opened. All secure. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were thinner tonight, that the darkness outside had found a way in. It was almost 3 a.m. when he woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was the hum of the refrigerator or the faint pipes in the wall. But then he realized it was coming from the living room. A whisper. It was soft, almost gentle, like someone speaking from the far end of a tunnel. The words were unclear, rolling over each other in a strange rhythm, like a lullaby sung in reverse. Noah crept out of bed, his bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The whisper grew clearer as he neared the window, though the language, if it was a language, was nothing he recognized. He stopped just short of the curtain. His heart pounded in his ears. Slowly he pinched the fabric and pulled it back a few inches. She was there. The old woman stood in the exact same spot as before, but this time her mouth was moving. Her jaw opened wider than it should have, the skin stretching like it might tear. Her voice was the whisper he had been hearing. Yet somehow, it was inside his apartment as well. Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time, she blinked. It wasn't normal. Her eyelids closed too slowly, then opened all at once, like a camera shutter. The whispering stopped. Then she mouthed 3 words, slow, deliberate, impossible to misunderstand. "Let me in." Noah dropped the curtain and stumbled back, his breathing ragged. The apartment felt smaller, the shadows deeper. From the other side of the curtain came the sound of fingernails dragging across glass. Long, slow, scraping, and then nothing. Noah didn't move for nearly an hour after the whisper stopped. He just sat on the couch, hands clenched into fists, eyes locked on the closed curtain. The apartment was silent but not empty. He could feel her there. Finally, unable to stand the tension, he crept forward and pulled the curtain back in one sharp motion, like ripping off a bandage. She was still there. The old woman hadn't left. Her face was pressed so close to the glass now that her nose flattened against it. A thin fog of her breath spread across the pane, only to fade and return again in slow, rhythmic bursts. But now she was smiling. It wasn't the kind of smile that belonged to a friendly neighbor. It was too wide, too deliberate. The corners of her mouth stretched toward her ears, revealing teeth that were crooked, jagged, and far too many in number. Some were dark and chipped, others sharp and pointed. Noah's stomach churned. She lifted one hand and placed her nails, long, yellowed, and curved, against the glass. Slowly, she began tapping. Top, top, top. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried. It seemed to echo in his skull, each tap syncing with his heartbeat. Faster, louder, until he wasn't sure if it was the glass or his own pulse making the noise. Her smile grew even wider with each tap, as though she could feel the discomfort building inside him. Without thinking, Noah whispered, "What do you want?" The tapping stopped. She tilted her head, so far that her neck made a faint, audible crack. Then she pressed her ear against the glass, as if listening for something inside his apartment. When she looked at him again, her lips moved, not forming words, just shapes. Shapes Noah didn't want to understand. He yanked the curtain closed, heart pounding. But from behind the fabric, the tapping started again. Top, top, top. This time it didn't stop. Even when he moved to the bedroom, even when he covered his ears with a pillow, it was still there. The tapping didn't stop until the sun began to rise. Noah had spent the entire night pacing the apartment, too afraid to open the curtain again. The sound faded only when the daylight spilled across his floor, leaving him exhausted and shaking. For most of the day, he avoided the window. He cooked, cleaned, scrolled mindlessly through his phone. Anything to keep his thoughts away from her. But as night fell, his curiosity gnawed at him. By 10 p.m., the familiar pull was too strong. He needed to know if she was back. Slowly, he approached the window and slid the curtain aside. She was there. Same place. Same twisted smile. Her nails rested against the glass, unmoving for now. But something else caught his attention. Something that made his blood run cold. Behind her, in the dimly lit room, a shadow moved. It wasn't hers. The angle was wrong, the shape too tall, too thin. Its arms were unnaturally long, its head tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle. The shadow slid along the wall like liquid, bending in ways a body couldn't. Noah's breath caught as the shadow's head lowered toward the old woman's ear. She didn't react, except for her smile, which stretched impossibly wider, skin pulling tight across her face. He couldn't hear anything, but he knew it was whispering to her. Then, without warning, her eyes shifted, not to him, but to the shadow. For the first time, she moved her lips deliberately, mouthing words toward the thing behind her. The shadow straightened. Its head turned toward Noah. Even from across the street, he felt the weight of its gaze. His chest tightened, his legs weak. The light in her room flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the scene. Noah stood frozen, staring at the black square of her window, unsure if she, or it was still there. Then in the dark, two faint shapes appeared. Eyes. Not hers. Noah stood at the window frozen, staring into those faint eyes glowing in the darkness. He wasn't sure if seconds or minutes passed before they blinked, slow, deliberate, and then vanished completely. The window stayed black. He waited for movement, for any sign of her returning to her place, but the apartment across the street was still. Too still. Then, at the far edge of the streetlight's glow, something moved. Noah's stomach turned to ice. The old woman was outside. She stood on the opposite sidewalk, her nightgown stirring slightly in the cold breeze. Her hair hung in tangled strands, and she clutched the window frame's wooden edge. Only it wasn't there anymore. Her fingers just curled in the empty air as though still holding it. He blinked. She was walking now. Slow, dragging steps. Her feet made no sound against the pavement. She never looked both ways before crossing. Her eyes were locked entirely on him, her smile fixed, unchanging. Noah's first instinct was to back away from the window, but he couldn't. His body felt heavy, pinned by her stare. Halfway across the streetlight above her flickered, then went out completely. She vanished into the dark. Noah's pulse hammered in his ears. He forced himself to step back, to close the curtain, to run to his front door and double-check the lock. The hallway outside was silent, but something about it felt expectant. He grabbed his phone and hovered over the call button for the police, but hesitated. What would he say? That an old woman in a nightgown was crossing the street? That she might be at his building now? A faint scratching sound came from the far end of the hallway. He leaned closer to the peephole. The elevator doors slid open. No one was there. Then, just as they began to close, a pale, bony hand slipped between them, holding them open. Noah stumbled back from the door, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The elevator dinged. Footsteps began to shuffle toward his apartment. The footsteps were slow, not the heavy thud of boots or the quick patter of sneakers. These were soft, dragging, uneven. Step. Noah's breath hitched. He backed deeper into his apartment, keeping his eyes fixed on the door. His hand hovered over the deadbolt, even though it was already locked. The sound grew closer, echoing faintly in the narrow hallway outside. Between each step, there was a pause, like whoever it was had to gather strength before moving again. Then he smelled it. A faint, damp scent. Like wet leaves and rotting wood after rain. It was seeping in under the door, curling into his apartment like invisible fingers. Noah's stomach twisted. He recognized that smell. It was the same faint rot he'd caught on the nights she stood across the street. The footsteps stopped. He pressed his ear to the door. At first, nothing. Then a faint sound. Not breathing. Not whispering. Just a low, slow scraping, like fingernails moving lightly across the metal surface of his door. Noah's hand shook as he reached for the peephole. He hesitated, afraid of what might be on the other side. But the not knowing was worse. He leaned forward and looked. The hallway was empty, but the smell grew stronger. He pulled away, heart pounding, and that's when the scraping came again. This time from the opposite side of the apartment. The window. Noah spun around. The curtain in the living room was moving slightly, as if brushed by a breeze. But every window in his place was shut tight. He stepped toward it slowly, each breath sharp in his chest. The scratching grew louder. He could hear it now. Fingernails on glass. Then a faint shadow moved on the other side of the curtain. He froze. A pale fingertip slipped between the curtain panels from the inside. Noah's heart hammered as that pale fingertip pushed the curtain aside. It was thin and bony, the nail yellowed and curling. Another finger joined it. Then another. Until both hands were pressed flat against the glass. Only the glass wasn't cold, reflective, and outside. It was on the inside of his apartment. Noah staggered back, the air rushing out of his lungs. The living room window still looked normal from where he stood, but the way her hands clung to it, the faint moisture left by her skin, It was as if the glass now belonged to some place she controlled. Her face slid into view. The old woman's eyes were brighter up close, pale gray and wet, catching the faint light of his lamp. That unnatural smile spread across her lips, revealing those blackened, jagged teeth. No, Noah whispered, shaking his head. She tilted her head, just like before, and her voice came this time. Not the whisper from across the street, but a rasping, wet tone that made his skin crawl. "Now I can see you better," she said. Noah's throat tightened. The words seemed to seep into his head, cold and heavy. Her lips barely moved, yet her voice filled the room. He took another step back. "Stay away from me." Her grin widened. One hand dragged down the glass with a squeal, leaving behind streaks of something dark, thick and glistening. "You left me outside too long," she murmured. "It's warmer in here." The lights in his apartment flickered. For an instant, the glass behind her face looked like it wasn't part of his window at all, but a pane floating in blackness, with her pressed against it from another place. When the light steadied, her mouth was inches from the glass, her breath fogging a small circle. She raised her hand slowly and tapped the center of that fog. Tap, tap, tap. Then her lips moved again, this time without sound. But Noah didn't need to hear it to understand. She mouthed, "Almost." Morning came gray and cold. The curtains in Noah's apartment were half drawn, swaying gently as if touched by a breeze that shouldn't exist. The neighbor across the hall noticed his door standing slightly open. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe he had stepped out for coffee. But when she knocked and called his name, there was no answer. Inside, the air was stale, heavy. The living room looked undisturbed except for one detail: the window. The glass was fogged over from the inside, covered in smeared, wet handprints. In the center, someone had traced a small heart. Noah's phone lay on the floor beside the couch, screen cracked, a single unread message glowing on it. "Now you watch." By evening, the police had come and gone, shaking their heads. No sign of forced entry. No signs of struggle. No Noah. The apartment stayed empty for 2 weeks. Then, on a rainy Friday night, a young couple moved into the building across the street. They spent the evening unpacking boxes, laughing over the sound of the rain tapping against their window. Around 11 p.m., the woman noticed something strange. In the apartment across from theirs, a light was on in one window. A man stood there, pale-faced, pressed close to the glass. His hair was messy, his skin almost gray in the dim light. At first, she thought maybe he was just watching the storm. But then she realized he was staring directly at her, unblinking. She laughed nervously and waved. He didn't respond. He didn't move at all. His hands were gripping the windowsill so tightly that his knuckles showed white. "Who's that?" her boyfriend asked, coming to join her. But when she glanced at him, then back at the window, the man was smiling now, too wide. Lightning flashed outside, lighting up his face in stark, unnatural detail. His teeth were jagged, black in places, just visible through the stretched grin. The young woman's breath caught. "Wait," she whispered. "I think he's mouthing something." The man's lips moved slowly, deliberately. 3 words. "Let me in."